Hello and welcome to today's session about advanced organizational development. Today we will talk about change management strategies and techniques. Today we will talk about change management practices and strategies that you can use and you have been using or your employers have been using in the workplace to bring about positive changes. So we'll talk about change and basically how to minimize resistance to implementing changes that the organization wants or those that you have determined as a group are necessary. And again, I will go back to the textbook, Cross-Cultural Change Management. So I'm going to try to explain some of the concepts that I have written here in the textbook. So we'll provide a review of these briefly. Again, the textbook is out of print, but the university library probably has a few copies that you can skim through whenever you're on campus. I think we all agree that human behavior is very complex. It's always been a complex phenomenon. We've had philosophers, researchers, experts continue to obviously study the human mind, the human brain, to see why we behave the way we do. And we'll continue to be doing this for the years and centuries to come. A person's behavior and response to any change can range from very simple on the one side to very complex on the other, from functional to dysfunctional, and from group orientation to selfishness, and from highly productive to highly ineffective responses. So there's no panacea or magical solutions that are cookie cutter or step-by-step to managing human behavior during any change implementation. And any change implementation can evoke different responses from different human beings. So the right solution often depends on the situation in the progressive as well as dynamic readiness levels of each individual going through the change process. So as an organizational development expert, you can bring in the situational leadership model back by assessing the readiness of all workers and then using an appropriate leadership style accordingly. Understanding and effectively managing human behavior requires assessment, management, and good leadership skills. So in other words, you use both the art and sciences associated with management and leadership. Human behaviors toward change can be best influenced by, first of all, gathering the right information. Second, by understanding the situation through a careful assessment. Third, by having a holistic perspective of the entire department or organization. And fourth, by truthfully communicating with everyone who is impacted by the change in a timely manner. In other words, we don't want them to be caught by a surprise. Effective change agents and managers do demonstrate a high level of resiliency in their style of managing and leadership, especially if you are going to be an outside organization development consultant. You need to be a lot more resilient compared to those who have position power or authority within the organization. Resiliency generally refers to a person's capacity to be able to absorb high levels of change while also displaying minimal dysfunctional behavior. So resiliency is about having high levels of emotional intelligence or EQ and patience in challenging circumstances. Emotion is a wide range of observable behaviors expressed through feelings and changes in a state of mind and body for a person. Emotional intelligence is the ability to deal with other people successfully and consistently over time without having any emotional outburst. By understanding our own feelings, we can understand and evaluate others a little bit more effectively. Emotional intelligence perhaps is oftentimes more important than your IQ in some cases. For emotional intelligence, we can look at Daniel Goleman's material. According to Daniel Goleman, there are 5 main elements of emotional intelligence. That would be self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social work. So these are areas that we need to exercise and develop ourselves in by getting to know more about ourselves in regulating our own behavior and self-motivating as opposed to waiting for other people to come on and turn on the lights or to be energized. And we need to empathize and we need to have good social skills. Emotional intelligence is not necessarily something that you're born with, right? So we gain it over time and through training, education, by listening to our parents, listening to the teachers, and going to workshops and so on. So the self-awareness, the self-regulation, and energizing yourself, being self-motivated and empathizing with others or listening to see what other people feel in their perspectives and building the social skills are all things that we can do. So regardless of how you have responded to change in the past, you can certainly develop these skills for yourself every single day to become better and better. Thereby you become more emotionally intelligent and respond to changes more effectively. As OD consultants and change managers, we need to be highly mature when it comes to our emotional intelligence. We need to be very careful and move methodically. And change basically means we're going from what is to what should be. In other words, we're going from real to ideal. Today's work environment is full of changes, both at the organizational level as well as the individual or interpersonal levels, which tends to affect employees and managers alike. Change can be cumbersome and sometimes very uncomfortable, yet the human mind can be programmed or at least influenced to see change as an opportunity. It is through change that ordinary people like you and me can create extraordinary results individually as well as with obviously our colleagues and teammates. If we keep doing what we've always done, then we will always keep getting what we always got in the past. So it's ludicrous to expect different results from the same actions or without doing things differently. The goal is for us to analyze what we did wrong and make improvements on it. So this is where change comes in. Change is the process of turning things from one state to another. Change in its simplest format is the art of making things different. So change is a modification to the way things are or how things are done. In other words, change is a modification to the status quo. Change management, on the other hand, is the art of effectively and efficiently making things different or perhaps better. There are three different types of change that you'll see most experts talk about. That would be passive or natural changes, mandated changes, and then self-generated or proactive changes. So let's look at each of these. Passive or natural changes are those changes that are not noticeable at the personal level, but nonetheless they do take place. For example, the way you and I were growing, we were born and then we began a sort of crawling and then walking and then we became teenagers and then we became adults. So those are passive or natural changes that happen and takes place, and obviously we welcome that. Mandated changes come from top down to the individual level in the form of laws, demands, policies, and regulations in the organization or sometimes in the industry. Self-generated or proactive change is usually initiated by an individual, by a team of 4 or 5 people, or by the organization's senior managers. Now, the self-generated or proactive change's successful implementation needs research, it needs support, it needs reliability and reasons and credibility in a strong leadership environment. So the support of the leadership is always going to be mandatory and necessary if it is going to be accepted by all employees in the workplace. Managing change means managing human behavior. It appears that the main reason change implementation is often difficult is because we tend to resist it as human beings. So change management is about helping people understand the need for change, to accept change, and to implement change and become advocates of change as change agents or champions of it. Now we need to understand that change can be either negative or it can be positive. So change can affect one person positively, another person sort of negatively. Change is not necessarily always bad, right? So sometimes we have a sunny day and it rains. That's a major change if you're outside. But it doesn't mean that change is always necessarily negative, because we need the rain to grow plants, to grow trees, and to have running water. So we adjust to it accordingly. Now, change itself is not necessarily bad. What actually happens does not necessarily make or break a person, but it is your response to the situation that either make or break your reputation, your promotion opportunities, your opportunity to get another job in the organization. So you can have proactive responses to change, or you can have reactive responses to change. Let us briefly look at the two responses to change. Reactive responses are unplanned, and their purpose is to catch up with the industry or competition before the firm or the industry, along with its people, are out of the picture. In other words, before they go bankrupt. So those are reactive responses. The reality of bankruptcy and losing your job obviously is a strong motivator and driver for accepting change or welcoming change, but unfortunately sometimes it comes too late. Proactive people in firms are opportunity minded, so they plan for the future as much as possible, and they plan for and expect change every single day, week, month, year. Proactive responses are anticipated, planned, as well as aligned with the company or our own personal purpose and mission in the organization. Proactive people are smart, so they do not necessarily resist or meet change through a head-on collision. When proactive people encounter change, they move from having a point of view to a viewing point in order to see all of the possibilities and perspectives for welcoming change. Proactive people use change to their advantage. They thrive on it, similar to martial artists who go along with change in the same direction and simultaneously gain more power in fluidity as they strike the target. So instead of resisting, we flow with the force in the same direction, thereby using that force to our own advantage. When it comes to changing people, there is a relationship of dependency that we need to talk about. So there are three types of people in this world: dependent, independent, and interdependent people. Dependent people, those who wonder what happened. Independent people, those who watch things that they want to happen. And then interdependent people, those who make things happen along with others. Hopefully you are the third kind, especially if you're going to use the dialogic OD processes to get teams to discover solutions to complex problems that they're facing now or will be facing in the future. Dependent people are those who feel helpless and vulnerable. They do things that are expected of them from others in order to receive recognition, reward, maybe a praise, maybe a pat on the back, etc., etc. Independent people are those who always want to be in control, or else they do what they want to do, which are things that they can accomplish by themselves, regardless of what others think or say. So the performance of independent people are limited to some extent to their own ability in performance. So in a given 8 hours, they can accomplish 8 hours of work. That's it, because they depend on themselves. So they work independently. They don't like to share and work with others. On the other hand, interdependent people are those people who understand that they can only go so far working by their own efforts. They understand that everybody needs someone else if they are to live happily and realize their full potential. They know that synergy means combining the efforts of 2, 3, 4, 5 people and producing more efforts than they ever could do individually. Interdependent people are holistic or systems thinkers. They see the impact of individual components on the whole. OD consultants and change agents can use the acronym ACTION to fulfill their change management responsibilities. First, you acknowledge and accept your role in the change management process. Second, you communicate your goals, needs, and plans to other stakeholders. Third, you think tolerance, teamwork, and target. In other words, the people who are impacted. Fourth, you initiate the change. Fifth, you objectively observe nuances and responses to change. And then finally, sixth, you negotiate noteworthy observations and suggestions into the strategy. So remember the word action. Acknowledge, communicate, think, initiate, objectively observe, and negotiate to bring about positive changes. So change can happen at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, at the organizational level, as well as the environmental level. As you can see in this model, where individual, interpersonal, organizational, environmental changes are all being impacted by many different elements. So including the industry demands and norms, management styles, leadership styles, societal laws and values to bring about structural or functional, interpersonal, and technical changes in the work environment. So the individual is always at the core of these concentric circles impacting him or her. All of the changes coming from society, from the industry, from the organization, from the department manager, seems to impact ultimately that employee. So keep in mind the employee and what he or she is going through. This is why we say you need to do a lot of work to reduce the level of resistance by knowing what the employees will feel once the change is implemented. So we need to reduce the barriers for them to be successful. That means we need to educate and train them. We need to be there for them. We need to provide them the right resources, because ultimately all the changes that people are going through, it comes down to the individual level, thereby creating a lot more stress for the person. Creating individual and interpersonal change must precede organizational and environmental change. So making changes at the personal and interpersonal levels would be the first steps toward creating cultural and organizational changes. This is why it's so important for us to be examples and role models of change that we expect of others in the department and organization. Know that people resist change mostly due to the loss of control over what they do or the perception of such a loss. So therefore, it is the change agent's role and responsibility to reduce and eliminate this fear by instilling a sense of confidence in your coworkers who are impacted by change. When it comes to change management, you need to be aware that all people go through the emotional cycle of change known as dream. You can keep in mind the emotional cycle of change known as dream by remembering that all changes will go through some elements of this before people fully accept and integrate it into their workplace. So denial is normal response from all individuals when we're seeing major changes. Sometimes we provide reasons and rationale for keeping the status quo or the way things were. And then we ultimately have to explore our options in terms of, do we stick with the status quo or do we adapt to the new changes? And finally, all of us obviously have to accept, otherwise we lose our jobs. So we have to accept the job, we have to accept the new learning that takes place, we have to accept the new ways of doing things in the reality of what is, if we want to be a part of that organization. And finally, you want to get people to the motivation stage where they become change agents at the organization and thereby proactive people in implementing the change. Over time, you want to increase people's commitment. So the more time, the more education, the more awareness, the more training that you provide, the more likely that they will be involved in this new change or the mission and values of the organization. So you can get from the first stage of denial to the fifth stage a lot faster if you engage people at the beginning and make them part of the change management process at the outset. Ultimately, most change management processes seem to involve certain steps. The first step would always be to identify the need in strategy for change. Second, you want to gain consensus for change. Third, you want to implement the change. And fourth, you want to resolve the barriers that are inevitably going to be there among people because, again, human behavior is very difficult to change. So sometimes even if we want to change, because of habit, we might do things the way it's always been done. So be patient with people and help them to resolve the barriers that keeps the status quo. And finally, you want to review, evaluate, and plan to see what went right, what went wrong, and what you can do to take corrective actions at this stage and then continue the cycle. We can put the change management process steps into a flow chart. So first of all, you identify the need and strategy for change. Second, you gain consensus and you ask yourself this question: do people see a need for change? If the answer is no, go back to the strategies that help you to gain consensus. If the answer is yes, then you implement the change. And number four, you resolve barriers to change. In this case, you ask yourself a question again: is the change part of the daily operation and work process for every employee? If the answer is no, go back to resolving those barriers to change. If the answer is yes, then you evaluate, review, standardize, institutionalize, and plan for future changes. In other words, you always learn and reflect from what went right. In order to gain agreement for change, you need to build a sense of urgency. Make sure you are fully prepared to deal with a change because change is constant and so should be your response to it. You need to create a clear tomorrow for your colleagues and teammates. And the best way to get people's agreement and support is to show them a better tomorrow, a better way of getting things done. Make sure that they're clear about the promised land because it can be a pull for change. And finally, show the way, be a role model. Create a clear mission or purpose for the people in the company with everyone's involvement. In other words, you jointly create this future vision or mission. A sense of a worthwhile and worthy purpose can be a great motivator for change for anybody, especially the millennials and the new generation of employees that you will be recruiting and retaining in your workplaces. So be the example you would like to see in your people. Kurt Lewin's force field model refers to the identification of the problem, the determination of the solution, examining and evaluating both driving forces as well as restraining forces, in assessing the value and ease of change for each force, and finally selecting strategies for implementing the agreed upon change. Keep in mind that the Newton's law of physics, stating that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, holds true. So you're going to have to increase your driving forces like training, communication, team building, providing incentives and goal setting and whatever else is needed as part of the dialogic OD processes to help people understand and come up with the reality and necessity of change or proper change and solutions you should do. Because there are going to be restraining forces that causes resistance from employees, especially when they fear the change, when they're used to the old paradigms and like it, when they say it's not my job, when they're basically saying that their egos are involved because they developed the status quo. They were part of the process for years and years. So know that those fears are real for most individuals. Try to obviously reduce them as much as possible and increase their driving forces to have a successful into the change management process. When it comes to reducing restraining forces, you can create dissatisfaction with maintaining the status quo. You can eliminate the fear of losing control, status, or power. You can eliminate the fear of losing existing benefits and rewards. You can eliminate incentives for maintaining group norms if the current norms do not support the change. You can eliminate employees' complacency with current methods. You can make use of the current skills and experiences of employees in the future so people can feel fulfilled that all their years of experience is being used for good purposes. You can diminish uncertainty about the future as much as possible, despite the fact that nobody can predict the future. And finally, as OD professionals and change managers, you need to acknowledge, you need to understand, and you need to handle resistance in a positive manner. Professor Roosevelt Kantor once said that corporations must make radical changes if they're to be fit enough to win in the Olympics of world competition in today's global environment. Tom Peters mentioned that the business environment is no longer predictable. Financial, technological, and market changes come fast and furious, and only flexible organizations that learn to live with chaos and change will survive. We need to acknowledge that change can cause conflict and bring about an invisible pandemic known as stress. Major and continuous change can actually create a strong culture where core values are intensely held and widely shared among employees, where a high level of stress might be the norm. It's always a good idea to understand the relationship between change, conflict, and stress. The more change people experience, the more stress that they will experience, and the more stress they experience, the more conflict will be there among their teammates and their bosses, and sometimes between their professional and personal lives. So conflict causes more stress and change obviously impacts both conflict and stress. So unfortunately, as we move forward, we are always going to be dealing with change that increases the tendency for facing conflict and stress. This is why it's important to train, educate, and prepare everyone to deal with conflict effectively and to manage stress effectively and proactively as well. And when it comes to stress management intervention techniques, you need to have programs to help employees exercise, take care of their bodies, meditate, do yoga, go to the gym, eat healthier. And also you can have career planning to where people feel safe staying with your organization in the fact that they may not be furloughed or fired due to not having the right skills. So provide them the right skills and plan their careers properly. There are planned changes and then there are unplanned changes. Planned changes result from a deliberate decision to alter the department, the organization, or the way things are being done. Unplanned change is change that is imposed on the organization and is often unforeseen. So for planned changes, sometimes we can be proactive. On the other hand, for unplanned changes, unfortunately, we have to be reactive and accept the change as quickly as possible. So we need to prepare employees and managers to effectively deal with both planned as well as unplanned changes. In terms of the scope of change, it can be incremental, strategic, or transformational change. Incremental change is change of a relatively small scope, such as making small improvements. Strategic change is change on a larger scale, such as organizational restructuring. And we've been seeing more of this from big organizations as well as smaller ones during the COVID-19 pandemic years. Transformational change is change in which the organization moves to a radically different and sometimes unknown future state. So if you look at companies like IBM, Sears, they've had a lot of changes over the years, and some of those have been transformational changes in order for them to survive or even thrive in some areas. We need to make sure everybody becomes a change agent. So a change agent is a person or group of people who are able to undertake the task of introducing as well as managing a change in the department or in the organization. change agents can be internal or external. There are advantages and disadvantages associated with each one. The advantages with internal change agents is that they know the past history and the political system of the organization, as well as the culture, because they've been brought up with it in this organization at least. In the internal, people also have to live with a change, so they'll move obviously carefully and strategically. The disadvantage of internal change agents is that they may be associated with certain cliques or factions, and they might be accused of favoritism toward different departments or colleagues and friends. Also, they may be too close to the situation to be objective at times. The advantage of external change agents would be that outsiders seem to have an objective view, and there's some sense of impartiality when it comes to their decisions. The disadvantage of hiring external change agents would be that they are external. They don't have enough knowledge about the history and the culture of the organization. So they may be viewed also with suspicion by some people. Why are we bringing these people that don't know anything about our organization to make decisions about how we should implement change, or which departments should restructure, redesign themselves, or even who should get terminated or furloughed in the organization. So for external change agents to succeed, they must be perceived as trustworthy, be experts in their fields with a proven track record, and sort of be similar to those that they're working with on a day-to-day basis in the organization. Overall, organizational development is a systematic approach to organizational improvement that applies behavioral science theory and research in order to increase individual as well as organizational well-being and effectiveness, both in the short term and in the long term. That's, again, a good summary of organizational development definition. You need to start with diagnosis and needs analysis in any OD consultancy job. You intervene by introducing certain techniques to bring about positive changes, and you follow up to make sure the change is implemented successfully, and you learn from the experience. There are many intervention methods and techniques. The survey feedback is a widely used method of intervention where employee attitudes are solicited by questionnaires. The questionnaires can be anonymous, group reporting format. There should be no repercussions to anybody's giving their opinion. There should be a clear purpose to the survey, and there should be follow-up to share the results with your employees. You can also use management by objective as an intervention method. Management by objective is an organization-wide intervention technique of joint goal setting between employees and managers. The quality program interventions are programs that embed product and service quality excellence into the organization's culture. You raise the aspirations about product and service quality. You embed certain product and service quality excellence. Team building intervention technique is designed to improve the effectiveness of a work group. Large group interventions are events that bring all of the key members of a group together in one room for an extended period of time to discuss the solutions to an existing problem. You can have process consultation intervention. The process consultation intervention is an OD method that helps managers and employers improve the processes that are used in the organization to produce a product or serve customers. Skills training is basically increasing the job knowledge, the skills and abilities that are necessary to do a job effectively in the organization. You can have sensitivity training intervention, which is designed to help people understand how their behavior affects others in the department or in the organization in general. The management development training intervention provides a number of different skills that managers need to make the organization a little bit better than it is right now. Role negotiation is another intervention method to bring about positive changes in the organization. This is where individuals actually meet and clarify their psychological contract with their bosses in their organization. Sometimes it's been said that there's at least about 25% gap between what employees think their job is and what their bosses think their job is. So that 25% gap obviously leads to conflicts and sometimes lack of promotions or lack of raises for the employee. So we need to communicate effectively by being clear about what our jobs are and what our bosses think our jobs are. You can have job redesign as an OD intervention method that alters jobs to improve the fit between the individual in his or her skills as well as the demand for the job or the position. If you're going to apply the Kurt Lewin's three-step model for change, first is unfreezing, second is moving, and third is refreezing. So unfreezing involves encouraging people to discard the old behaviors by shaking up the equilibrium state which maintains the status quo. Second would be moving. New attitudes, values, and behaviors should be substituted for the old ones in this case. And third would be to refreeze. That involves the establishment of new attitudes, values, and behaviors as the new status quo. In other words, we need to sort of institutionalize the change so it becomes sustainable and somewhat permanent. That's what refreezing basically means. So in the unfreezing stage, the organization eliminates rewards for the current behavior. In the moving stage, the organization initiates new options and explains their rationale for the change. During the refreezing or institutionalization of change, organizational culture and formal reward systems tend to encourage the new behavior, so the incentives and rewards are aligned with that. In his book, Your Public Relations Are Showing, John Newton differentiates between the boss and the leader. He mentioned that the boss drives workers, the leader coaches them. The boss inspires fear, the leader inspires enthusiasm. The boss says I, the leader says we. The boss says get there on time, the leader gets there on time. The boss fixes the blame for the breakdown, the leader fixes the breakdown. The boss knows how it is done, the leader shows how it is done. The boss says go, the leader says let's go. The boss assigns the task, the leader sets the pace. The boss depends on authority, the leader depends on goodwill. As organizational OD consultant, you need to always remember to be the leader. Even if you have formal position, power, and authority, try to avoid being the boss or being the manager. Always work on being the leader, whether you're internal consultant or external consultant. As always, remember that organization development and change management is part of life. So you need to police, evaluate, and improve your change management skills, your communication skills, your conflict management skills, and your stress management skills regularly and help others do the same. Good luck.